Speaking of raw deals, a full week has passed, and we have never addressed this. I text you when the news broke because you called it, I guess, days before it happened. You called it like right after the Super Bowl, that your spidey sense was telling you that Kyle Shanahan and the San Francisco 49ers would make Steve Wilks the fall guy, that he would once again get a raw deal as a coach. And sure enough, the Niners moved on from defensive coordinator Steve Wilks. And in case you need receipts, here's Michael Holley calling in, unfortunately being right.
I hope I'm wrong on this. This is an observation I've had throughout the playoffs, throughout the season. And I brought it up before, kind of like being a little sarcastic, but I think there's something there. I think there's something there between Kyle Shanahan and Steve Wilks. And I think one of the changes San Francisco will make, I hope I'm wrong, I think they're going to go in a different direction. They're not really on the same page philosophically when it comes to their defense. D'Amico Ryans had something different. Robert Saleh had something different. And Steve Wilks and Kyle Shanahan, I wouldn't be surprised if they make some kind of personnel change. I'm just.
Well, I too hope you're. Yeah, what I was saying is I too hope that you're wrong. Turned out that you were right. Yeah. Let's unpack it. It's a story as old as time. Let's unpack it.
It is. It is a story as old as time. And Michael, you said something about quarterbacks, and you talked about with Justin Fields, it's the infrastructure, and it's the supporting cast. Everything is not right. You go into a situation, and you are expected to thrive when things around you are not quite right, but the focus is on you. And nobody, if you say, hey, well, how about that? That's broken. Or why do we do it this way? Why don't we change it up? Or I've got a different idea. You're the problem. You're making excuses. Oh, why don't you just do the job like everybody else or whatever? Nobody really looks at what you're saying. And that's just, I guess that's professional sports. Sometimes that's life. But I would say start with Steve Wilks. Steve Wilks, there's a reason we sat here a couple of years ago and nodded our heads when Brian Flores came out with a lawsuit against the NFL. Their hiring practices were not advantageous. We're not open to, always open and free for black coaches. That was a lawsuit a couple years. That was the first day of Black History Month. I think it was 2 years ago. Was it February 2022? I believe it was. We were on the air.
Sounds familiar.
And I nodded my head and I said, oh, there's a lot more here. Steve Wilks is a part of that lawsuit, and he should be. So let's start with Steve Wilks. His story really is so familiar. Let's start with Arizona. He goes, he takes over a team that was already declining. They had gone to the conference championship game with Bruce Arians as head coach. They won 13 games. That was a couple years before. The next year they won 7 games. Next year they won 8 games. They bring in Steve Wilks. First season, he wins 3 games. They draft the wrong quarterback, Josh Rosen. They draft him. Then they fire Steve Wilks after a year. Franchise already in decline. They fire him after 1 year.
General
I don't know, Michael.
Got issues. Yeah.
Right. You know what they did?
Ownership. Yeah.
They fixed the quarterback. They get Josh Rosen out after a year, and they bring in Kyler Murray. And so they bring in Kyler Murray and bring in Cliff
Kingsbury, correct.
And go from 3 wins to 5, because that's what happens sometimes when you are taking over a franchise that's rebuilding. That first year, it might be 3 to 6. D'Amico Ryans got lucky, and give him credit, but most of the time it doesn't work that way. So Steve Wilks is out, and once again, that opportunity, he is not given any type of grace. He is not allowed to build it. He's not allowed to say, hey, I do it this way, a first-year coach. And then when he goes to Carolina, and we talked about this last year, once again, he is put into a situation that's a mess. He's in a
Right.
messy
Interim.
situation. I mean, the interim coach, I don't have a training camp. I don't have my own assistant coaches. I can't sit down. I don't even have time to sit down and cast visions for you because you just put me on this treadmill that's already going and it's going pretty quickly, and you want me to salvage the situation. And you know what I did? I salvaged it. In 12 games, I went 500 for a team that was going nowhere. I gave them direction, and the owner comes in and says, hey, I want an offensive mind, and I'm going to hire all these offensive coaches. I could have done that. I could have been there for that.
Well, but how'd that work out for him?
Yeah, and so here they are with the number 1 pick again. Steve Wilks goes on, and this is really a story about be careful who you work for, who you work with, and be careful of the opportunities that look appetizing, that look attractive. Be careful about signing up for those. Because if you think about this, I'm just going to say, this is a fact. Kyle Shanahan said this. I'm not making this up. Kyle Shanahan said he wanted Steve Wilks to run the same scheme that Robert Saleh did and that DeMeco Ryans did. He wanted it. Steve, this is not your scheme. I want you to do something different. Okay, I want you to do something different. Oh, I'll do something different. I'll come in, I'll run this scheme. I lead the league in takeaways. My defense. I'm 3rd on defense. They were first last year. They gave up 16-something points a game last year. This year they gave up 17. I go to the Super Bowl, and we go to overtime with Patrick Mahomes, and we lose by 3 points. The guy across the field, who also did a great job, Steve Spagnuolo, just like I did, he gets a contract extension. I get fired. I mean, so you mean to tell me, Michael, if Steve Wilks, if they had stopped him on 4th down, do they fire him?
Would he have been?
Is it still not a good fit?
That'd have been ballsy.
Kyle Shanahan, it's not the.
That would have been ballsy.
This hurts me. This hurts me.
Yeah, you gonna fire him at the parade? That would have been
right. Great guy.
Doubtful.
So what is this? What is this? This is just. I told you the other day off the air. I'll tell you on the air. I was thinking about this driving, and I was just getting so mad. I was getting so mad because it's not a football story. It's not a football story. It's an employment story, and unfortunately, if you want to understand why Black History Month is important, this is something that black folks in a number of industries have dealt with many times. It's so familiar. It's so familiar to many of us. Not all of us. I can't speak for Black America. I'm not even trying to. But many people listening to us said, yep, that's about right. That's how it works. And so now we've got to talk about, hey, Steve Wilks. Oh, hey, listen, remember there was that game in Minnesota. He called that zero blitz. Yeah, there was that one. And, then there was Kyle Shanahan calling that timeout in the Super Bowl. Okay. But we're not gonna look at the big picture of a guy who was asked to come in and do something different, and he did successfully.
And they got to the Super Bowl. They got to the Super Bowl.
They get to the Super Bowl.
They got to overtime, and they lost to Patrick Mahomes. Like I said the other day,
against the best quarterback.
What you predicted is great coaches get people fired, oftentimes unfairly. Wow, nice job, guys. So you just preached a sermon. You talk about the real sermon of Steve Wilks' story. You just preached a sermon, and as the grandson of a Baptist pastor, I know better than to try to preach after somebody has already preached. So I will try to I'll be brief. Famous last words from a minister. I'll keep this brief. Before I close.
Briefly, then,
As I close.
Then I'll take my seat. No, you won't. Give it a benediction. Give us a benediction,
hour later. Hour later. Can this be another example of the plight of black coaches in the NFL? And I still understand it. I still understand the move. Is that possible for both things to be?
Can
those two things coexist? Here's why. And I'm not disagreeing or arguing with or countering or contradicting or anything that you just said. All facts. We agree on this. He was scapegoated. He was the fall guy. If they'd have won, I have a hard time believing that Kyle Shanahan would have done this. He might have done it in the middle of next season. So a couple of things to point out. And this doesn't mean that, see, because I remember when the Brian Flores thing happened, a lot of people pointed out that the Dolphins had and still have a black general manager. And I'm sure there's sophisticated, I'm sure there's some sophisticated term that escapes me right now, maybe I don't even know, that explains the phenomenon, which I guess I'll just reduce to simply, but I have black friends. Or I know black people when it comes to racism, when it comes to institutional racism. I'm sure there's some term for that, right? Like, you know, like, I don't have a racist bone in my body. See, you know, well, no, you can still commit acts of racism and perpetuate institutional racism despite your connections with black people and other people of color. I only say that because I'm about to point out San Francisco's history when it comes to black coaches and executives in recent years, which is so stellar that they have made an industry out of profiting off of the draft picks associated with their black executives and coaches going on to get jobs elsewhere. Most recently, D'Amico Ryans, for example, his predecessor as defensive coordinator, Steve Wilks. All right? So I
the same thing with Saleh. They got it with Saleh.
I feel like now that doesn't mean that Steve Wilks's race is not a factor, but I do feel like we need to point out how they do things in San Francisco. So I think the real issue here, more than anything, specifically to San Francisco, is he had big shoes to fill schematically. Saleh, Ryans, there's a standard and there's a synergy and a simpatico that they've had between the offensive and defensive coordinator there, or the head coach and the defensive coordinator there, that maybe was just off this time. Okay? That's one. Two, my bigger issue is not that Steve Wilks was fired as San Francisco's defensive coordinator. It's that he's a defensive coordinator to begin with, to your original point. This man is a head coach. He should be a head coach. He's already proven to be a capable defensive coordinator. He should be a head coach. Put him in the same bucket as Eric Bieniemy when we talk about the poster children for this issue. Like, he should be a head coach by now. And what worries me, what vexes me, is that when this type of thing happens, he gets, for lack of a better phrase, blackballed. And now this is a mark on his resume. This is like, now he's been fired, and now he has to, rebuild his career. You know what I mean? Like, because we thought San Francisco was a soft landing for him after he got a raw deal in Carolina. Unfortunately, one and done. So he should be a head coach. He never should have been available to San Francisco.
This might be more of a raw deal.
Coordinator.
This might be more of a raw deal in Carolina.
Right, because typically interim coaches, especially black interim coaches, Antonio Pierce is an outlier. Like he's the exception, not the rule. Like, you typically are, they're already looking for the next guy anyway. Black or white, but especially with black coaches. You're right. This is probably worse, especially given that they were just in the Super Bowl. So I say that to say, he should be a head coach. Carolina should have kept him on as head coach. He should have gotten and should get more consideration for head coach. Because I think oftentimes what happens, and I think this is why a lot of owners screw up, and there's one owner in particular that I do want to applaud, and we talked about that team a minute ago, but we didn't mention the head coach. Too many owners want coaches who are, young and white and having worked for Sean McVay, first and foremost, or been connected with Sean McVay, first and foremost, or Kyle Shanahan. But beyond that, they want the hot guy. They want the guy that had the number one defense. They want the guy that had the best, or number one offense, I beg your pardon. The Ben Johnsons of the world. They want the wonderkins, right? Instead of, give me a coach who's been through some stuff. Give me a coach who's experienced it all. Give me a coach just like a pastor who's been through some stuff in life, who can speak from experience, highs and lows.
Exactly.
which is why
You're preaching about it because you've been through it.
Which is why we didn't even talk about it. We talked about the Atlanta Falcons with Justin Fields, Raheem Morris. Hopefully Steve Wilks, and I will, as I close, hopefully Steve Wilks is Raheem Morris. As in, it wasn't that long ago when Arthur Blank, I'm old enough to remember Arthur Blank saying, yeah, if Raheem Morris goes undefeated, he can get the job.
Yes.
Life is funny sometimes. So hopefully, whether it's the next owner in Carolina or whether it's some other team, Steve Wilks' sojourn, this wilderness that he's in his professional career right now, he will end up being where he should have been all along, but be in a better situation or the right situation, because maybe it was the best thing for him. Now I am preaching. Maybe he wasn't rejected, he was redirected. Maybe it was the best thing for him not to get that head coaching job in Carolina. Because look at that owner. And we talked about David Tepper. Maybe it was the best thing for him for Kyle Shanahan not to keep him around. This is what faith is about. It ain't gonna be easy. Faith ain't just accepting the blessings, you know? Like, it is like, wait a minute, this is what's best for me. I trust you that this is what's best for me to not be in San Francisco. Regardless of how successful they are as an organization, maybe this partnership with Kyle Shanahan ain't right for me. This ain't where I'm supposed to be, Steve Wilks. I'm not supposed to be here. I'm going to go be great somewhere else. So maybe Kyle Shanahan, just like David Tepper before him, did Steve Wilks a favor. Maybe we might not like it.
Maybe.
But ultimately, Steve Wilks may wind up, and hopefully, prayerfully, will wind up the same way Raheem Morris has with the job he was supposed to have. Had to go through some things in the interim, no pun intended, but maybe Steve Wilks, that's my hope and prayer for Steve Wilks and other coaches like him, that he ends up where he's supposed to be. Because if Kyle Shanahan couldn't appreciate you or David Tepper couldn't appreciate you, you don't belong there. The doors in the church are open.
I will say this. And some churches they talk back. The preachers say, talk back to me if you can. Some preachers say that.
Am I preaching to myself? Am I preaching to myself?
Am I preaching right? Now, some churches, because I went to Catholic school. It was funny. I go to Catholic school, then go to my folks' church on weekends. Catholic school, there ain't no talking back in Catholic church. Ain't talk back in there. Now you recite it as a group. And, you recite the prayers as a group, the Apostles' Creed, but you ain't talking back just during a homily. You ain't just going to speak up and be like, that's right.
Before you get the last word on that, I just want to make sure I'm clear on something. Like, do you understand where I'm coming from? Like, I'm in no way absolving.
Oh, no, I got you. No, you're right, 100% right.
The fact that this is generally an issue for black coaches. But the specific circumstances, I think, required a little more nuance. And honestly, I'm just at a place in my life, man, where I'm just like, you know what? Like, what's for me is for me. And what's for Steve Wilks is for Steve Wilks.
Yeah. I would say, and to your point, San Francisco has, those compensatory picks. No matter how you feel about them, like, oh, are you going to profit off this thing? What? But they they have sent a lot of executives and coaches to other places and have received these compensatory picks because whether it's Mike McDaniel, whether it's DeMeco Ryans, whether it's Rand Carthon, as I said, a lot of
Crazy
others.
Adolfo Mensa, executives.
Moved on.
Absolutely, right.
But I just want to point out, last thing, I promise, it's the last thing on it. I hope you're right, Pastor. This is what I would say in talk back in church. I hope you're right. Yes, you're preaching good. Yeah, you got it. But I do want to point out, and I know God works in so many ways.
Mysterious ways are not our ways. Yeah. His thoughts are not our thoughts.
Not our thoughts. Okay. All right. I do know that there's a financial piece of this as well. You say you should be a head coach. Head coaches make more money than defensive coordinators. And then when he was briefly a head coach, he was like, so think about it. Head coach for 1 year.
The generational wealth that we've been denied.
Right. Yes. 1 year.
Oh, yeah.
In Arizona versus the 4 that Cliff Kingsbury got. And Kingsbury got a contract extension, then got fired. So he's there for 4 years. He gets an extension along with the general manager who fired Steve Wilks. They both got extensions. Steve Wilks is one and done. So think about the financial difference there.
The injustice
now let's go to
deep.
Carolina. Let's go to Carolina. 6-6. I turned this around. Hey, Frank Reich ain't smelled 6 wins. Okay?
Right.
He ain't smelled it in Carolina. But
He
he
walks
gets
away with
a
a
big
guaranteed
contract.
contract.
He gets
Yeah.
a fully
That he's still-
guaranteed contract
that he's still getting
that
paid for.
never reaches
Yeah.
6. He's out.
Yeah.
He's just there counting
Yeah.
his money.
Yeah, no,
So-
that's the real issue when it comes to this. That's the underlying part that does not get talked about enough. The amount of money that, and that's, you want to talk about, that's universal. The amount of money, whether you're in corporate America or the NFL, the amount of money that black families have been denied because of not being promoted.
And so for those who doubt it and deny it, like, oh, that can't be. Whether you're talking about the dollars earned or like cents on a dollar, you know, when you're talking about men and women, when you're talking about black men and white men, black women and white women, the differences. How could this be? Well, I just gave you one example. That's just one example right there. That's just a breakdown. But just multiply that in different areas, different industries, and that's how we get where we are. That's one of the reasons we are where we are.
Yep. Well, listen, man, I'm glad we revisited that. I know it's been on your heart since it happened. You called it. We both like, yeah, hope you're wrong, but it's like you can see it since the Minnesota game that there was a disconnect there. There was a disconnect, you know. And trust me, don't get it twisted. Me being optimistic that there's something better for Steve Wilks does not make it any more right. Does not make it right.
But yeah,
doesn't make it right.
But see, to bring it back, that is that's not optimism. That's faith. That's just faith. That's your faith, and yours and mine.
Yeah.
And we don't know how it's gonna happen, but we know what'll happen.
I got so excited about Raheem Morris. We even talked about Bill Belichick getting shut out, which I kind of sort of told you that. But like, I love that they went back to Raheem.
Hey, thank you for watching Brother from Another. If you haven't hit that subscribe button, go ahead and do that now. Don't forget, you can catch us 3 to 4 weekdays on PeacockTV.com and on Sirius XM Channel 85.